In the world of K-pop, music show wins are one of the most conventionally accepted indicators of success. For some girl groups, it takes as short as just a week to win after they debut, whereas for some it takes 1,923 days. All throughout the history of this genre, there have been well-known turning points, situations where decisive change occurs which shapes how things play out for years to come. Groups like Girls' Generation, 21, Big Bang, BTS, and Blackpink debuting are just some of the instances of turning points which, in their own ways, shaped the course of K-pop, even still in the present day. Sometimes, these turning points define generations, and sometimes they set new precedents for future artists. Today, we'll talk about a potentially much smaller one, but a critical turning point nonetheless, Dreamcatcher's first win after 1,923 days. Now before we jump into it, I just want to put a really quick disclaimer that this is all just a matter of personal opinion, and so naturally these claims are subjective and not objective. At the end of the day, the best part about music is the varied interpretations and perspectives that come with it, and so remaining respectful of the thoughts of others is paramount. Disagreement is fine, but hate, toxicity, or just plain rudeness will be deleted from the comments section immediately, so please don't bother wasting your time. With that being said, we have a fair bit to cover, starting with a short recap on Dreamcatcher's history up until this point. So with that being said, let's get straight into it. The story of Dreamcatcher starts just a little bit before 2017 with a group called Minx. Minx was a 5-member girl group which debuted under the small entertainment label Happy Face Entertainment, known for groups such as Dal Shabet and later D1s. It consisted of members Jiu, Sua, Shion, Yuhyun, and Dami. Minx's concept was quite cute and bright, a popular sound at the time, but one that was also highly competitive. In the same year, SM's new girl group Red Velvet made their debut, and the year after, in 2015, future girl group Titans G-Friend and Twice would debut with the same concept and sound as Minx, effectively eclipsing them immediately. After less than 2 years, while still only rookies, Minx were disbanded by Happy Face and were set to re-debut the following year with the promise of something K-pop had never seen before: a new alias, a new sound, and 2 new members. This would be the birth of Dreamcatcher. Dreamcatcher debuted on January 13th, 2017 with their first single titled Nightmare and its title track, Chase Me. The song consisted primarily of rock and metal elements, a sound which traditionally hasn't been mainstream in Korea, let alone K-pop, and understandably so, this wasn't exactly received with a fanfare in the streets. Not only were Dreamcatcher a brand new group from an almost unknown company, but they were essentially in uncharted territory as a female idol group with a horror and rock concept, and a strong one at that. For much of Dreamcatcher's history, the reception has been much the same as the debut track, with exceptions. Dreamcatcher's rock and metal influenced sound has always had trouble sticking and finding its way into the Korean general public's ears, but they've been literally promoted to the ends of the earth, and along the way have gained scores of dedicated and extremely passionate Korean and international fans. The first time that Dreamcatcher and their fandom Insomnia would get their chance at recognition and success would be on SBS's The Show on the 24th of September 2019. Here, they would face up against the recently debuted Everglow and against Cube's up-and-coming girl group CLC. Everglow was the primary competition for Dreamcatcher on this show, Deja Vu was the candidate, and whilst it was up against some tough competition, it was still an extremely strong comeback. At the time, SBS had 3 different sets of scoring criteria by which they allocated points: song and album points, pre-voting plus YouTube views plus expert scores, and real-time voting. Dreamcatcher won the pre-vote by over double, live voting, song and album points, leaving YouTube views and expert votes in the middle category. They should not have won the middle category and didn't, as Everglow's total YouTube views were higher. However, based on the maths behind calculating points, as it's percentage based, Dreamcatcher's score should have been higher than the 1,850 that they received, meaning that they got less marks than they should have. Even if Dreamcatcher scored nothing on the expert evaluation, which was 15% for this total score, they still would have had a score high enough to take out the win. So why did Deja Vu lose? Well, that's the question, and SBS didn't have an appropriate answer for it. With this, the group and fans lost their first chance in 2 years for their first win, when despite opinions on why they didn't get it, mathematically, they should have. Now recovering from this was sure to be a difficult task, but the following comeback started to explode even more, with Dreamcatcher becoming a more commonly thrown around name internationally. In early 2020, they released their first full album titled Dystopia, The Tree of Language, and this marked the start of the Dystopia series, which would end a year later with Odd Eye in 2021. This album became their best-selling album to date, and was the first album to take them past 50,000 copies on Hunter, as well as being an album acclaimed by their fans as their best. in it contained sounds ranging from rock, metal, electronic pop and EDM among other genres, and it served as a perfect showcase of the group's varied sound and versatility. In the same year, Dreamcatcher came back with Boca from the album titled Dystopia Lose Myself, and following the same trend, this album outsold its predecessor, selling almost 25,000 copies on the first day, 86,000 in the first month, and over 100,000 copies in total on Kaon. In 2021, Dystopia, Road to Utopia, and its title Odd Eye would end the trilogy, breaking records yet again, and would crack almost 100,000 sales in the first month on Hunter. Across these three comebacks alone, the influx of fans and exposure started increasing radically internationally, as despite the COVID-19 pandemic, Dreamcatcher hosted an online concert practically every comeback. In Korea, the story was a little different, yet very gradually, reactions to Dreamcatcher on YouTube, Korean comments under the MVs, and also just general chatter domestically started exponentially increasing with each comeback. The domestic voting presence was there, streaming was too, and Dreamcatcher were becoming highly competitive on all shows, especially towards the end of Odd Eye promotions. Despite all of this, by the time Odd Eye had finished up in early 2021, it had been 4 years and still no win for the members and fans, and 6 years with still no recognition for the original 5 members of Minx. Dreamcatcher went on to break their own personal best with their second comeback of 2021 titled Because, and this sound broke away from the Dystopia trilogy and most other titles before it. Despite this, still no win even after 1700 days or 4 years and 8 months. No one saw it at the time, but this comeback would be the secret layup, so to speak, the final attention drive before the dream title, Maison. For years, fans of Dreamcatcher have theorized over why it was that wins were unattainable. Was it the music? Was the industry against them? Was it comeback timing? Or were heavier promotions necessary? The comeback timing argument for many seemed to be a crutch, and Maison's comeback timing honestly couldn't have been any worse. Dreamcatcher were nominated against and stood toe-to-toe with artists like DKZ, a group looking for their own redemption arc with the hype to back it up, Onyu, not only a member of legendary group SHINee, but also well loved for his solo music, chart killers IVE, who have 18 wins with 2 songs just 4 months after debut, and the kings of K-pop, Big Bang, with their first release in 5 years, titled Still Life. Considering how prominent IVE and Big Bang's comebacks were at the time, to be wedged between these artists would have been the nightmare of those people who perpetuate that comeback timing was crucial to wins, but somehow, as they always have, Dreamcatcher managed. On the 20th of April 2022, during Show Champions airing, Dreamcatcher seemed to have the best chance of finally taking their first trophy, and fans all around the world waited as anxiously as they did for Deja Vu's results on the show 3 years earlier. In an instant, 5 years of effort by the group and fans was realized with an incredibly emotional win. This would be their first, but not their last for this promotional period, with their second win coming on the show on April 26th, an event which many have referred to as Deja Vu's Retribution. In the blink of an eye, just 2 wins, tears of happiness and relief from thousands around the world later, both Dreamcatcher and the course of K-pop had been dramatically impacted. Now of course, success is defined differently these days, and wins don't necessarily mean what they used to. 10 years ago, wins and the domestic recognition which came with them essentially was a lifeline which many K-pop groups and companies clung to, something which was almost indispensable to their longevity. Think of this as team sports, for example. Every artist out in the industry are strikers on the same football team trying to score goals. Positions on the team are limited, and those who underperform are likely to sit out on the bench or simply not play. For big companies with multiple groups, those who underperform might be shelved whilst others are given a chance, and for smaller companies with groups who don't make headway, they might not even show up to the match at all. Within K-pop, the most standard model was that wins equaled recognition, recognition meant higher sales, which meant more revenue for the company, and generally a longer lifespan for the group. If any of these factors were missing, it's very well possible that the group would go through a hard time, and even today, we still see groups sometimes disband due to financial hardship. In today's scene though, the reality is actually quite different. The market is now astronomically bigger, revenue streams more diverse, and as the industry has evolved, so has the way that music is disseminated. YouTube, TikTok, and reality content is abundant for most groups, and live concerts with online VODs are now the norm, allowing multiple avenues for fans to enter into a group besides the music, MVs, and general Korean variety. In today's climate, a win is much less likely to be correlated with the direct survival of a group, and as such could be considered by many to be unimportant. But the impact that a win can have on a group's mentality and the will to push on shouldn't be underestimated. That being said, beyond the principle of simply just winning, One of the biggest reasons that Dreamcatcher's win is so influential is the precedent that it sets for future K-pop artists. Since the inception of the genre, K-pop has not always been dominated just by the big three, and in the last 10 to 15 years, examples of groups succeeding under smaller companies have only risen both in scale and number. Some great examples of these groups would be Sistar under Starship, Infinite under Woollim, G-Friend with Source Music, and most notably, BTS, just to name a few. Each of these artists debuted at different times throughout history, and have carved their way into the Hall of Fame with stunning performances, loyal and dedicated fans, and their own signature sounds. So how does Dreamcatcher differ? They're from a small company too, so they'd surely be likely to join the ever-growing circle of groups bringing their small companies up to mid-tier players, right? Well yes, but also no. Signature sounds are one thing, but Dreamcatcher's is almost a completely different ballgame. Now just to disclaim what I mean here, each of the aforementioned artists have been through their fair share of struggles, and existing as a group in the industry is far beyond easy. That being said, each of these groups debuted at different periods, in different generations, and with sounds which weren't too detached from the pop music genre within Korea. Dreamcatcher, on the other hand, standing out as somewhat of a black sheep, debuted with a sound which essentially had no appeal to the general masses, and almost no correlation with the K-pop genre. Their task to simply even make it work was monstrous, and at times it seemed like Dreamcatcher and K-pop were just like mixing oil and water. Despite this, Dreamcatcher didn't transcend this issue, but rather built a bridge between K-pop and the rock and metal genres by taking advantage of one of K-pop's defining characteristics, genre mixing. In the process, they inadvertently wound up creating their own genre or signature sound, so much to the point that now rock or metal in K-pop is almost synonymous with Dreamcatcher, and they're often the standard to which songs or artists emerging with this sound are compared against. Now for a small company group, to not only achieve domestic success the way that Dreamcatcher did, but with the sound that they did too, is monumental. This in itself is an example, a beacon of sorts signalling to groups and companies of the future alike that with relentless promotion, a concerted effort and also quality music, that almost anyone can make it. This alone is huge for the future of K-pop, as the bigger players only get even bigger, and mid-tier companies and groups shoot to the forefront of the scene once more. Leading by example, Dreamcatcher's success alone can and likely will usher in a new era of artists who will continue to diversify the landscape of the Korean music industry. As we see this diversification of sounds and also groups occur under our noses, it's very likely as well that this event is a signpost of sorts, a key indication of a much larger macro change occurring within K-pop, one highlighting the impact of globalization on the genre. Now, K-pop is an extremely dynamic genre which is constantly moving, changing tact and its tune, sometimes very quickly, and sometimes very slowly. One of the biggest shifts which has been occurring for almost a decade now though, is the spread of K-pop into the international sphere. This larger shift has been occurring incrementally for years, recently pushed by large groups such as BTS and Blackpink, but with all of Dreamcatcher's aforementioned circumstances considered, it can be argued that even if a group like Dreamcatcher with one of the most domestically unpopular genres can get a win, then the impact of international fans on K-pop is not only becoming stronger, but provided the music is quote-unquote good, and of course promoted properly, anything can succeed in the future. In a way, this also signals a shift in the power dynamic within the Korean entertainment industry. Although maybe small right now, the landscape atop which this grand competition takes place within the entertainment industry has diversified significantly in the last few years, making K-pop in 2022 almost comparable to the second-gen boom. Gone are the days where big three companies have the sole monopoly on the industry as they used to, and whilst they're still powerful, there are multiple challenges rising up, and there have been for quite some time. This is not to say that big three groups have waned in any way though, as aespa rises to heights that SM girl groups haven't seen before, and ITZY, Stray Kids and NMIXX are JYP Entertainment's hope for the end of this generation and the next. YG still has their rumoured rookie group Baby Monsters in the basement, but if history repeats and has told us anything, it's that they will likely also be successful too. The argument here rather, is that multiple players are rising up alongside the big three, and the best way to see this is as a diversification of the market. HYBE's chokehold on the industry is becoming more apparent by the month, especially with LE SSERAFIM about to debut, Starship have re-entered the game with IVE, Stacey with High Up are big news to consider now, and now, so are Dreamcatcher. Now, a plethora of smaller and mid-tier sized companies are producing successful artists amidst the clash of the new 4th generation titans, and overall, the playing field is at times starting to look a little less predictable. With this diversification of players comes an increase in varied sounds, also allowing for the already wide net that K-pop casts to get even wider. Whilst Dreamcatcher may just be a notch on the larger belt of change, this is perhaps one of the most significant in recent times, and one which indicates the way in which K-pop is currently changing. It's still very early to tell exactly what the impact of Dreamcatcher's recognition within Korea means for the bigger picture, and this is all a matter of interpretation as well. Some will consider this insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and others will say that the scale of this achievement is purely relegated just to the Insomnia fandom. The thing is though, is that throughout K-pop's history, we've seen artists single-handedly able to change the course of K-pop forever. And whilst Dreamcatcher may not be as prominent as say Girls' Generation, Big Bang, BTS, Blackpink, Twice, IZ*ONE, or many of the other iconic players, their 2 wins with Maison are a lighthouse for the future of K-pop and the acts that rest just over the horizon, those which aim to subvert the norm, stay original, and of course, persist through the hardships of being a K-pop act at all costs.